another edition of the Comic Anthologist. And if you're tuning in for the first time,
hit that like button and hit that bell to subscribe.
And you'll be in tune to everything that we post going forward after hitting that subscribe button and hitting that bell. In any case, we are going to discuss another chapter of the Armor Wars, which was called Armor Wars 2. And this is where basically Tony Stark was battling for the heart and soul of his own body.
Because let's start off where, before Armor Wars 2, Tony Stark was shot by a crazed ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, she shot him and it basically put him in a wheelchair.
Yeah, put him in a wheelchair. He was paralyzed from the waist down. And so, in order to compensate for him not walking, because then people would see him in his wheelchair or in his hover chair, kind of like similar to Professor X.
Right.
Basically, he would wear his armor. He got to the point where he was wearing his armor 24/7 just so he could walk around because he didn't want to be confined to that chair.
Yeah, he modified that armor so that way he could walk. And let's just say you did see a touch of that in Avengers Endgame, or better yet...
Yeah, Captain America Civil War,
yep.
when Rhodes was wearing the harness for his the bottom half of his
Yeah, because he's paralyzed, so Stark made it so that he could walk. Well, you saw a variation of it in the movie.
Right.
It was also shown in that comic book series.
Right, exactly. And so in Armor Wars 2, basically what happens is, prior to the Armor Wars 2, Stark gets a microchip implanted into his spine. And it enables him to walk again, but then it comes at a cost because that microchip that gets put into his spine is controlled by a certain villain by the name of Kirsten DeWitt and the name of the twins, the Mars twins.
I remember them.
And so they basically were trying to set up to have Stark run his company their way with him using that microchip in his body. And Stark had no idea that who was using that, but he could see that he had no control over his body. He had no control over what he was speaking or sometimes saying or whatever, and people were looking at him like, what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, they were trying to further their own agenda by having Stark as the figurehead,
right.
But they had control of. Basically, he was a passenger in his own body.
Right, and that's
let's make it more
more prisoner
specific.
in his own body.
Yeah, not a passenger, prisoner.
And at the time too, when that was all going on, he was also going toe to toe with the Living Laser, the Mandarin, and Fin Fang Foom, which is a giant dragon related to the Mandarin's rings.
Right.
And so, with that being said, it got to the point where the only way he had any kind of safe refuge was to wear his armor. He didn't want to come out of his armor because anytime he came out of that armor,
that's when he was under the control.
He was under the control of Kirsten DeWitt and the Mars twins.
And with the having not wear that armor, basically anybody knows if you're a paraplegic but you have the ability to walk and have the ability to go ahead and do the things that you want to do, you don't want to give that up. So therefore, he stayed in the armor 24/7 to the point where it's like, listen, I can't keep doing this because it's also taxing the rest of his body and the rest of his system because it started affecting his nervous system as well.
Right. It actually heavily damages the nervous system.
He had to wear basically a circuitry sheath, a circuitry outfit, just so that it would compensate for the nerve damage that was done by that particular incident with the Mars twins and Kirsten DeWitt.
And see, the crazy part too was with the Living Laser. When he popped up, when he first appeared during the Armor Wars 2, I should say, he showed up as that Titanium Man. But then Iron Man's like, wait a minute, he died. What's going on? And then come to find out, when he was firing his repulsors at him, they were going through him, and that's when it came out that it wasn't Titanium Man. It was a Living Laser disguising himself as a Titanium Man. It's basically trying to be as a ghost haunting Tony Stark. And so what it boiled down to was that the situation got worse and Stark had to be taken care of. James Rhodes, aka War Machine, had to look after him.
And that's the whole thing. Stark wore the War Machine armor first before James Rhodes even put it on.
Right, exactly.
Because
this is long after the Armor Wars, though.
Oh, yeah.
Armor Wars 2, I should say.
Yeah, Stark had to wear that to a degree, because who was he working with? The Masters of Silence or the Masters of...
Masters of Silence, but see, that's what we're getting past Armor Wars 2.
Oh yeah, we're going further.
Yeah, see, because in Armor Wars 2, getting back to the main crux of the storyline, basically, the Mandarin was attacking as well. And then Fin Fang Foom they were basically trying to set up their machinations up in China. And so Iron Man was doing the best he can to stop the Mandarin, stop Fin Fang Foom. But then by the time everything was all said and done, it was so taxing on his nervous system, on his damaged nervous system, that James Rhodes had to wear another version of the classic neoclassic armor to save him. And then what had happened after that was the crazy part was then Kirsten DeWitt decided to get in and get involved personally with his own set of armor. And see, the whole irony of the story though with Armor Wars 2 was that when Kirsten DeWitt and Iron Man finally fought, Kirsten DeWitt was basically like heavily injured in the battle. And even Tony Stark, he was heavily injured. James Rhodes had to step in and save him. Basically, at the end of the story for Armor Wars 2, this was the clincher. Tony Stark had no idea who Kirsten DeWitt was. He was like, I have no clue who this man is. And Kirsten DeWitt was basically an individual who Tony Stark or the Stark family, he had a grudge against him because his father was affected by Tony Stark with his company or whatnot. And so he decided to Kirsten basically decided to take it out on Tony Stark. And so, but that was the whole clincher part, because I remember reading that back in the day. And he's looking at him like, I have no idea who this man is.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole thing. Sometimes family grudges go far deeper than you could possibly imagine.
But then the other person doesn't even know where the grudge is coming from. He
Exactly.
just knows he has to deal with it.
Yeah, he just basically was like, wait a minute now. Like, why are you attacking me? I had nothing to do with what happened before.
Right.
What are you coming after me for? He
Right.
basically was trying to basically get revenge for what happened from prior, with Tony having no clue about what happened.
Yeah.
It's something similar to what you saw in Iron Man 2 back in the day with Whiplash.
Oh, you talking about, with Whiplash and the, yeah, exactly.
And they brought that story up where Howard Stark and Howard Stark's partner at the time helped create the first arc reactor.
Right.
Only for finding out that his partner was working with the Russians and selling those secrets to the Russians, and he ended up getting arrested.
Right.
And also being shipped off to Siberia. And taking it out on his son, where the son ended up becoming Whiplash and also creating his own reactor, arc reactor, and coming after Tony Stark for something that happened with his father.
Yeah, and Tony Stark had nothing to do with, but he had to deal with the sins of the father.
Exactly. And that's what that would basically it boiled down to. You saw a trace of that in Iron Man 2, but it did happen in Armor Wars 2.
Right. And now, getting to the aftermath of Armor Wars 2, eventually, James Rhodes, just like you said before, Tony Stark had to created the
War Machine.
War Machine armor. And eventually, James Rhodes himself became War Machine. And then the other aftermath dealing with Armor Wars 2 is that he had to fake his own death.
Yep. He basically went into a coma, medically induced coma, and
to repair his nervous system, but he had to do it the way how they do it. They had to do with some kind of like techno-organic virus to help, or I forgot what kind of something that they used, but Tony Stark had to literally like rewrite his own body code just so that he could get back to being walking again,
and just having his full function of his whole body.
Right.
But at the same time, he pissed off James Rhodes in
and
the
a
process
lot of other people because
for faking his death.
Faking his death, he lied to a lot of people. But that was the aftermath of Armor Wars 2, and those repercussions turned out to be a whole lot bigger. And again, James Rhodes, then eventually War Machine got his own book behind that.
But the thing is, the relationship between the two of them was so
fractured,
strained
yeah.
that, let's just say, it was never the same again until certain things were repaired, and that took place during another big storyline where it's called Avengers Time Slide, because then another broadcast we're going to do about is where Tony Stark became a murderer and also betrayed the Avengers and also had to fight against his younger self from a different timeline.
Yeah, so that's another story for another time. But if you enjoyed this broadcast or our episode,
please leave us any kind of comments, messages, or whatnot, and let us know what you enjoyed about it, what you didn't like about it, and then go from there. Until then, thank you for tuning in, and definitely enjoy your evening. Peace. This is the Comic Anthologist.
Oh, one last thing too, I forgot to mention.
Oh.
The Armor Wars 2 story arc was written by John Byrne, which is still like one of my all-time favorite comic book writers.
Oh yeah, because he was the main one that also rebooted the Superman book back in 1986.
Yeah, he also did the X-Men too. He did the artwork for the X-Men.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, back in the 70s and actually the 80s, because his book started on the issue of Days of Future Past.
Right.
Issue Uncanny X-Men.
No, you're talking about John Byrne?
Yeah.
The artwork? No, his first artwork for Uncanny X-Men was 108.
It was 108, so it went back that far?
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, getting back to the point, John Byrne wrote the series, and John Romita Jr. did the artwork for Armor Wars.
And it gave it a different feel from what
Right.
you saw from before, from what Bob Layton and Dave Michelin
Dave Michelin had done and everything.
and
So,
it was really good. That's all I can say.
yeah, so a lot of these story arcs that we've written, I mean, not written, we've read over the years, I should say. It's a shame that they didn't make to the movies, but it's so much material, it's not even funny. But
Who's to say that it show up in the movies later on down the road?
Right,
Because
but-
they could use political intrigue dealing with things of that nature.
Yeah,
but that's a whole nother story.
Armor Wars and Armor Wars 2, to me, were like the best stories that I've read for Iron Man. Even though I've read a lot of Iron Man stories, because I've been collecting Iron Man and been a favorite of mine since I was like 4 or 5 years old. So,
And not only that, too, we have to go in about Extremis, and then
well, that's another story for another
that's
time.
we got
Another
Extremis,
episode.
and then we have the when Tony Stark went on the run, called Tony Stark Disassembled.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just so many of them.
It's just so many, but we won't go into it right now. But in any case, until then, have a great evening. Comic Anthologist signing out.